he never wanted to marry her. The thought of it alone made his chest tighten and his mind restless. He was a man used to having control, used to making decisions that affected his life, his family, and his business. Nothing was ever done without his consent or his approval. And yet, here he was, being told that he had no choice. A marriage was arranged, not for love, not for any chance of happiness, but for reasons that had nothing to do with him. It was a decision imposed by family expectations, social norms, and perhaps even old promises that he did not remember agreeing to. He could feel the tension building in his household, and even though he tried to appear calm and collected, inside he was a storm. She was nothing like him. She had grown up in a world so different from his, where money was scarce and luxury was unknown. From the stories he had heard, she had faced more struggles in one day than he had in his entire life. Blind since birth, she had learned to navigate the world differently. Every sound, every scent, every touch was a guide. Her strength lay not in her hands or her eyes, but in her spirit. He had heard people whisper about her kindness, her patience, and her unshakable courage. But he was not interested in hearing about it. To him, she was a poor girl, helpless and fragile. Someone who would not fit into his carefully structured life. When he first met her, he avoided looking at her face. The room seemed too quiet, almost painfully still. She sat there calmly, her hands folded in her lap, a small, polite smile on her lips. She did not seem afraid or nervous. Instead, she radiated a quiet strength that unsettled him more than anything else. He did not know how to react. She was real, not a concept or a rumor, and the reality of her presence made him feel trapped. He wanted to leave, to find a way out of this arrangement, but there was none. The papers were signed, the agreement final, and his family watched him closely, expecting compliance. She spoke first, in a soft voice that did not tremble, despite the tension in the room. She said her thanks for being accepted into his home, for being given the opportunity to be part of the family. Her words were simple, respectful, and sincere. She did not ask for anything, did not complain about the circumstances, and did not plead for kindness. He found himself listening even though he tried not to. There was something in her tone that demanded attention, a quiet dignity that he had not encountered in anyone before. The days following their marriage were filled with awkward silences, formalities, and the constant reminder of his resentment. He avoided her as much as possible, walking past her without speaking, leaving her to settle into a life she had not asked for. A life that she would have to navigate without guidance or protection. But she did not complain. She moved carefully around the house, learning its layout, listening to the sounds, feeling the textures, and understanding the unspoken rules. She adapted with patience, never imposing herself, never demanding attention. He watched her from a distance. And though he would never admit it, he began to notice the little things. The way she helped the household staff without being asked. The way she remembered the preferences of every person she met. The way she laughed, soft and musical, when something amused her, without realizing how much it lightened the atmosphere around her. He told himself it was irrelevant, that he could not care about someone he had been forced to marry. Yet he could not deny the small flicker of curiosity that began to grow. However unwillingly, the first night they shared a home, he felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief that it was over, tension that he would have to live with her every day. He avoided conversation, staying in his study behind the closed door, pretending to work, pretending not to notice her presence in the house. She moved silently, respectfully, giving him space, yet always nearby enough that he could feel her presence. It was as if she was part of the home now, quietly asserting her existence without demanding it. At mealtimes, she sat politely following the rules he had set, never interrupting, never drawing attention to herself. He noticed her manners, the way she engaged with the household staff, the small gestures that showed respect and understanding. He found himself annoyed by it, irritated that she could navigate a world he thought only he understood. He told himself it did not matter, that none of it mattered, but still, he watched. He could not help himself. There was something in her that resisted his dismissal, refused to be ignored. The first time he spoke to her directly, it was out of necessity. A misunderstanding about a household matter forced him to raise his voice slightly. She responded calmly, clearly, and without fear. She did not falter or stammer. She explained her perspective simply and logically. He was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him like that without fear of consequence, and yet here she was, blind, poor, and entirely unafraid. He wanted to dismiss her words, to remind himself of her position, but the clarity of her logic left him silent. He did not know how to feel. Days turned into weeks. He continued to avoid emotional engagement, insisting to himself that he could not, would not, and should not care about her. Yet the more he observed her, the more he recognized qualities that could not be ignored. Her patience was remarkable. She endured the difficulties of her blindness with grace. Her kindness extended to everyone around her, and she never allowed her circumstances to define her. She was strong more than he could admit, and her presence in his home began to shift something inside him. Something he was not ready to face. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, he overheard her helping one of the younger staff members, gently guiding them through a task they could not complete. Her voice was calm, encouraging, patient. He realized then that her influence extended beyond him and his household. It reached into the lives of everyone she encountered. The thought made him uncomfortable. He was used to being the center of attention, used to controlling the world around him. Here was someone who commanded respect and care without demanding it. It was confusing, infuriating, and oddly compelling. He tried to convince himself that his feelings were irrelevant, that he was bound by duty and nothing else. But each day, he found himself noticing her small gestures, the way she carried herself, the way she faced the world without fear. He began to see her humanity, something he had overlooked in his arrogance. He could not admit it yet, not even to himself. But a part of him was beginning to recognize that she was extraordinary. She, on the other hand, remained unchanged. She continued to navigate her new life with dignity and patience. She did not demand love. She did not expect admiration. She simply existed, resilient and kind. Her presence challenged him in ways he could not name. She made him confront his own prejudices, his own selfishness, and his own unwillingness to see beyond his world. He hated himself for the thoughts he could not control, for the curiosity that had begun to take root despite his resistance, and so their life began, filled with tension, awkwardness, and unspoken words. He lived in resentment. She lived in patience. He struggled with feelings he refused to name. She navigated a world that was foreign but approached it with grace. The house was silent at times, noisy at others, but in the background, a quiet story was unfolding. A story of two lives intertwined, one unwilling, one accepting. Each unaware of how the other would eventually change everything. He could not yet admit it. But the first cracks had appeared in his carefully built walls. Her presence, her patience, her strength, all of it, was beginning to seep through, quietly, unnoticed, but steadily. He was the master of his world, yet here was someone who refused to be mastered, someone who was quietly teaching him lessons he had never asked for. And though he would never say it aloud, he could feel that this marriage, forced and unwanted, was already beginning to leave its mark on him. Life settled into a rhythm, though it was far from peaceful. The man continued to live with an invisible wall between himself and the woman he was forced to marry. He kept himself busy with work, meetings, and obligations, often retreating into his study to escape the quiet presence of the girl in his home. Yet he could not ignore her completely. She moved with a calm assurance that disrupted his carefully controlled world in ways he could not yet understand. It was not loud or demanding, but steady, gentle, and undeniable. Her strength was quiet, but it was there. It drew his attention despite his unwillingness. She adapted to her new home with patience and intelligence. Though blind, she was remarkably independent, learning the layout of the house, the voices and footsteps of the staff, and the subtle nuances that indicated different rooms or people. She had to rely on more than just sound and touch. She had to use intuition, observation through conversation, and her understanding of human nature. And she did it gracefully, without complaint. She did not want to be a burden, and she made every effort to fit into a household that had not asked for her presence. and yet she did so without losing herself. The household staff, initially hesitant and unsure how to treat her, soon realized that she carried herself with dignity and respect for others. She noticed small details like the way the servants were tired after long hours, or how one of them seemed anxious about making mistakes. She would gently encourage them, offer practical suggestions, and often praised their efforts. Her kindness was not dramatic or performative. It was natural, sincere, and noticeable. Even the man could not deny it when he saw how people responded to her. There was a warmth she brought into the home that he had never noticed before, and though he tried, he could not ignore it. At times, he would overhear her speaking softly to someone, guiding them through a task or comforting them after a small failure. Her voice was calm and gentle, and her words were thoughtful. It made him uncomfortable in ways he could not explain. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who commanded respect and attention. Here was someone who demanded neither, yet she had an influence that could not be denied. He found himself watching from behind a door, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and annoyance. The first real test came when a minor accident happened in the household. One of the staff members had slipped and injured themselves, creating panic and confusion. The man, who usually handled emergencies with precision and authority, was momentarily at a loss. The girl, however, moved swiftly, offering comfort and practical advice. She guided the injured person calmly, reassured the others, and coordinated the small emergency with a confidence that surprised everyone. The man could not believe what he was seeing. She had no sight, no formal training, yet she handled the situation with a clarity and courage he had never seen in anyone else. For a moment, he had to swallow his pride and acknowledge her abilities silently. Over time, small moments continued to reveal the depth of her character. She noticed when he seemed tense or exhausted, offering a quiet word of encouragement or a small gesture of comfort. She remembered details about his life that even he seemed to forget, like the names of his colleagues or the preferences he had in food and work habits. He told himself it did not matter, that he could not and would not care about such things. Yet deep down, he began to feel a strange sense of curiosity about her, an awareness that he could not simply dismiss. Evenings became particularly challenging for him. He had grown used to solitude, to the comfort of his own thoughts, without interruption. Now, her presence in the house, her quiet routines, and her gentle care made him feel a subtle, unfamiliar tension. He could not escape it. She was always nearby, not intrusive, yet impossible to ignore. She spoke to the household staff, moved through the rooms, and carried herself with a grace that demanded respect. And slowly he found himself listening to her, noting her words, and considering her actions, even when he did not want to. One afternoon, she asked him a question that took him completely off guard. It was simple, practical, about a detail in the household that he had overlooked. She asked it politely, calmly, without judgment or challenge. He found himself pausing, unsure how to respond. Her question was not meant to provoke or test him, but it made him realize that he had underestimated her understanding and awareness. For the first time, he felt a flicker of respect. He did not admit it, even to himself, but it was there. A small seed had been planted. He began noticing the little things, how she remembered the voices of people he did not even remember meeting, how she anticipated the needs of the household without being asked, how she carried herself with dignity despite her blindness and the obvious hardships she had endured. It made him uncomfortable, but it also forced him to reflect on his own behavior, his own expectations, and his own shortcomings. He had been proud, stubborn, and self-absorbed. She, in contrast, was patient, humble, and strong. And though he would never say it aloud, began to feel a strange admiration for her. There were moments of tension, of course. He could not ignore his resentment completely, and he often reacted with impatience or harsh words when he felt overwhelmed. She did not respond with anger or fear. She listened, understood, and continued to move through the household with grace. Her patience was remarkable. She did not retaliate, did not complain, did not allow his anger to affect her calm demeanor. It was as if she had a strength he could not comprehend, and it unnerved him. Slowly, began to realize that his perspective on her was changing. She was no longer just a poor, blind girl forced upon him by circumstances. She was a person with intelligence, courage, and kindness. He was drawn to her in ways he could not yet name or understand. It was not love, not yet, but it was a recognition of her value, of her presence, and of the impact she had on the household and on him. It made him uncomfortable, but also curious, and he could not stop himself from noticing her. She, meanwhile, continued to live with quiet dignity. She did not try to manipulate him, did not seek his approval, did not expect love in return. She simply existed, resilient and compassionate, navigating a world that had been thrust upon her. Her strength was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, and undeniable, and it began to affect him in ways he was not prepared to confront. The days passed with small, seemingly insignificant moments that gradually shifted the dynamics of the household. He noticed when she helped someone in need, when she comforted a frightened child, when she offered advice that proved wise and practical. He observed her patience, her understanding, and her unwavering kindness. It irritated him at first because he could not control it or dismiss it, and yet it fascinated him. He could not stop thinking about her, could not ignore her presence, and could not deny the impact she was having on his life. By the end of the second part of their life together, subtle transformation had begun. The man, though still reluctant and proud, could not help but notice her. Her strength, her patience, and her kindness had started to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. He did not understand it, did not want to admit it, but he was beginning to see her as more than a blind, poor girl. She was someone remarkable, someone whose presence he could not ignore, and someone who would change the way he viewed the world. Whether he was ready or not, life had grown predictable, yet the quiet moments were deceptive. Behind the calm, a storm was approaching, and it would reveal truths neither of them could ignore. The man continued to struggle with his feelings, caught between resentment and the curiosity that had begun to grow in him. He still insisted to himself that he could not care, that she was someone he was forced to live with, and nothing more. But the universe had a way of testing hearts, and soon, the true measure of a person would emerge under pressure. It happened on a day that seemed ordinary at first. A minor accident escalated into a serious problem that required immediate attention. A fire had broken out in one of the storage rooms of the house, likely from an electrical fault. Panic spread quickly among the household staff. Shouts and cries echoed through the halls. The man who usually thrived under pressure found himself momentarily frozen. His mind raced, but the chaos made it difficult to act decisively. He realized with frustration that the situation was bigger than anything he could handle alone. Amid the chaos, she appeared. Despite her blindness, she moved with a confidence and clarity that startled him. She guided the staff, instructed them calmly, and even helped put out smaller flames where she could. She listened carefully to the sounds, smelled the smoke, and directed everyone to safety with a voice that was steady and commanding without being harsh. He watched, speechless, as she navigated danger with a precision and courage that no one had expected. It was remarkable, unnerving, and in that moment, he felt a crack in his long-held arrogance. As the fire subsided and the staff began to recover from the fear, he saw the relief in their eyes directed toward her. She had taken control when he had hesitated. The sight made him feel a mixture of gratitude and shame. Gratitude for her bravery and skill, and shame for underestimating her abilities and her strength. He realized that he had judged her based on appearances and circumstances, yet she had proven herself in ways that could not be measured by wealth or status. In the aftermath, while the staff cleaned up and assessed the damage, he found himself observing her in silence. She was calm, patient, and compassionate. She checked on each person, making sure no one was injured or too frightened. Her empathy extended not just to words, but to actions, and he could see the genuine care in everything she did. She was a guide, a protector, and a calming presence. He could not deny it, and yet he was unsure how to process the realization that he had misjudged her so deeply. That evening, when the house had settled, he spoke to her for the first time without the usual coldness or sarcasm. He asked how she managed to remain so calm during the chaos. She smiled gently and explained that fear could only control someone who allowed it. She had learned to rely on senses other than sight and to trust her understanding of people and the world around her. Her words were simple, yet profound, and they left a mark on him. For the first time, he felt a sense of respect that went beyond polite acknowledgement. It was deeper, more personal, though he could not yet define it fully. He began to see her differently. Her blindness was no longer a limitation in his eyes. It was a part of her resilience. Her poverty no longer seemed like a weakness. It had shaped her character in ways he admired, even if he could not admit it. Her actions had revealed a courage and strength that could not be taught or bought. He felt a strange mixture of admiration, guilt, and confusion. She had shown him the true measure of a person, and it unsettled him because he had always believed he understood life and strength. Days turned into weeks after the incident, and the change in his perception grew. He found himself listening more, observing more, and even seeking her opinions on matters he would have previously dismissed. She remained humble, patient, and consistent in her demeanor. She did not flaunt her abilities, did not demand recognition, and did not expect gratitude. Her consistency and authenticity were remarkable. The more he noticed her, the more he realized that he had begun to rely on her presence in ways he did not fully understand. She had become a silent anchor in a life that he had thought was entirely his own. He also began to notice the subtleties in her personality. How she remembered the smallest details about people around her, the way she anticipated their needs, and the quiet confidence she carried. He was fascinated by her ability to read situations without seeing them, to understand emotions without verbal cues, and to offer solutions that were practical yet compassionate. Her intelligence and emotional insight challenged his previous assumptions. He realized that her perspective on life was shaped not by what she lacked, but by what she had learned to endure and understand. One afternoon, he caught her comforting a young servant who had been reprimanded for a minor mistake. She spoke softly, explaining that everyone makes errors and that the important thing was to learn from them. The young servant listened, reassured and calm, and the man realized that this was not just kindness. It was leadership. She could guide and influence without authority, without fear, simply through understanding and empathy. He felt a pang of jealousy mixed with awe. He had never experienced someone wielding such influence without demanding it. Their interactions began to change subtly. He still kept a professional distance, still struggled with the idea of caring for someone he had been forced to marry. Yet he found himself paying attention to her advice, noticing her presence, and occasionally seeking her opinion. She did not take advantage of this. She simply answered when asked, offered guidance when needed, and continued her quiet, consistent ways. Her patience never wavered, and her strength never faltered. It was a presence that could not be ignored, and he was learning that perhaps he did not want to ignore it. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of the house, he found himself speaking to her about a personal matter he would have never shared with anyone else. Her response was thoughtful, empathetic, and without judgment. He realized then that she had a capacity for understanding that went beyond ordinary perception. Her blindness did not limit her vision. In fact, it enhanced her insight into human nature, emotions, and resilience. He felt a connection forming, fragile yet undeniable. It was new territory for him. It frightened and intrigued him simultaneously. Despite his growing respect and acknowledgement of her qualities, he still resisted admitting any feelings of affection. He told himself repeatedly that this was not love, that admiration did not mean emotional attachment, that he could maintain distance and control. But the moments continued to accumulate. The way she handled emergencies, the way she comforted others, the way she carried herself with dignity, all of it chipped away at his carefully constructed defenses. He began to question his own prejudices and assumptions about what it meant to value someone in the weeks that followed. He caught himself thinking about her at odd times, reflecting on her actions, and even comparing her approach to life with his own. He realized that her resilience and kindness had highlighted the areas in his life where he had been harsh, patient, or blind to the needs of others. She had become, without trying, a mirror reflecting his own flaws, and he was both frustrated and grateful for it. Her strength was not only transforming the household, but it was transforming him as well. By the end of this period, the man understood that his perception of her had changed fundamentally. She was no longer just the blind, poor girl forced upon him by circumstance. She was someone remarkable, someone capable of courage, empathy, and leadership. She had earned his respect in ways he could not have imagined, and he could no longer dismiss her presence in his life. The fire incident had been more than a test of bravery. It had been a revelation. It had revealed her true character and begun to dismantle the barriers he had built around his heart. He was still reluctant, still cautious, but a transformation had begun. The girl he had once thought he would never love had proven herself in the most profound way, and he was beginning to realize that his feelings, though unacknowledged, were shifting. The days after the incident passed quietly, yet nothing felt the same. The man could no longer ignore the subtle shift in his own thoughts and emotions. He had spent years believing that control and wealth defined power and worth. Yet here was someone who, without sight or fortune, had shown strength, courage, and wisdom beyond anything he had known. He found himself reflecting on her actions constantly, replaying moments in his mind where her patience and insight had quietly outshone everything he had considered important. He told himself repeatedly that this did not mean anything, that admiration was not affection. Yet deep down, he could not deny the change. She, as always, moved through life with her usual grace. She did not boast about the incident or seek attention for what she had done. She went about her days, guiding the household, caring for the staff, and continuing her routines as if nothing had happened. Her consistency and humility were remarkable. It frustrated him in a way that she did not recognize the impact she had on him. Her presence was like a mirror reflecting what he lacked, what he had taken for granted, and what he had ignored. He could not help but be drawn to her quiet strength. He began to observe her more closely, noticing details he had overlooked before. The way she smiled at small joys, how she interacted with the staff, the care she showed to the household itself, her attention to the smallest details, her ability to understand people. And her calm demeanor created a sense of harmony that he could not produce alone. He began to feel a strange sense of dependence on her presence, a realization that life in the household had become richer, not because of wealth or authority, but because of her character. Small interactions began to change their dynamic. He would find himself lingering during conversations, listening to her opinions even when he had initially intended to dismiss them. She spoke with clarity, kindness, and insight. And he realized that she understood not just the house and its people, but the man himself in ways no one else had. He felt challenged and unsettled by this awareness. He was used to commanding, to being the center of decision-making. And here was someone who could influence and guide without demanding authority. One afternoon, a situation arose where a business decision he was about to make could have serious consequences for the household. She overheard the conversation, and when he was alone, she gently offered her perspective. Her words were measured, careful, and insightful. She did not tell him what to do, but she asked questions and pointed out aspects he had not considered. He was taken aback. Her perspective, though untrained in business, was logical and profound. He felt a twinge of humility, realizing that wisdom was not confined to those with power or sight, but often found in those who had learned to observe and understand the world deeply. He started to seek her opinions more often, though he would never admit it openly. He found that he valued her insight, her calm reasoning, and her unique perspective. It was unsettling because it made him aware of how much he had underestimated her. The more he engaged with her, the more he realized that his initial resentment and prejudice had been misguided. She had earned his respect, and with it, a subtle emotional connection had begun to grow, though he struggled to name it. One evening, they found themselves in a quiet conversation after dinner. He had been unusually silent, reflecting on the day, and she spoke about something entirely unrelated, a memory from her childhood. Her words painted a picture of her struggles and triumphs, her resilience, and the small joys she had found in life despite hardship. He listened, captivated not just by her story, but by the way she conveyed it with clarity and grace. He realized that he was genuinely interested in her life, her thoughts, and her experiences. For the first time, he felt a desire to connect beyond the superficial, to understand her as a person, not just as someone imposed upon him by circumstance. She, in turn, began to sense a subtle change in him. He was more patient in his tone, more attentive to her words, and less dismissive of her presence. She did not force the connection, but she responded with warmth and openness. Her quiet confidence created a safe space for him to begin exploring his own feelings, a place where he could confront emotions he had long suppressed. Their conversations became longer, more meaningful, and more frequent. Though they both maintained a decorum that reflected the initial boundaries of their relationship, the man began to notice the small ways she impacted his life. Her presence brought calm to a household that was often chaotic. Her advice prevented minor mistakes from escalating, and her compassion eased tensions he had previously ignored. He found himself looking for her in the mornings, waiting for her guidance, and even seeking her approval in subtle ways. He would never admit it to anyone, not even to himself fully. But he had begun to rely on her in ways that went beyond practicality. A turning point came during a family gathering. Friends and relatives visited, and there was a discussion about various matters in which the man normally took the lead. He found himself deferring to her judgment on a few issues, not because he was obligated, but because her perspective offered clarity and wisdom that he could not dismiss. He felt a mix of pride and humility, an internal struggle he had not experienced before. Her insight was becoming invaluable, and he realized that he had begun to care about her opinion more than he had expected. He also became aware of his own emotional responses to her presence. He felt a protective instinct rising, a desire to ensure her comfort and safety. He caught himself feeling jealousy when others praised her or sought her attention. These feelings confused him, but they were undeniable. For the first time, he recognized that his emotions were shifting. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble. The admiration he had once felt was evolving into something deeper, something he had never anticipated. She, as always, remained consistent. She did not exploit his attention or manipulate his emotions. She continued her daily routines, her guidance, and her compassion with the same calm and dignity. Her authenticity made the shift in his feelings both inevitable and undeniable. He could no longer dismiss her as someone insignificant or burdensome. She had become central to his world, not through demands or force, but through her character and the quiet influence she exerted on everything around her. As days passed, he noticed himself seeking moments alone with her, wanting to hear her thoughts and share his own reflections. He discovered a curiosity about her past, her dreams, and her understanding of the world. He realized that he wanted her presence in his life, not out of obligation, but because it brought him a sense of connection, understanding, and warmth he had never experienced before. The walls of indifference were breaking down, and he was confronting emotions that were both exhilarating and frightening. The subtle awakening of his feelings also brought a newfound patience. He no longer reacted with immediate irritation or dismissiveness when she spoke. Instead, he listened, considered, and even reflected on his own behavior in response to her words. He began to appreciate the depth of her understanding, her ability to navigate complex situations, and her resilience in the face of challenges. It was a profound shift in his perspective, one that marked the beginning of a deeper emotional connection. By the end of this period, the man understood that something significant had changed within him. His feelings had evolved from reluctant tolerance to genuine admiration, respect, and a growing emotional attachment. He could no longer ignore the impact she had on his life, nor could he deny the connection that was quietly forming. It was not yet love in its fullest sense, but it was a shift that would soon pave the way for a deeper bond. The blind, poor girl he had once resented had begun to awaken feelings in him that he had long suppressed, and he found himself unable to imagine life without her presence, guidance, and compassion. Time passed, and the quiet evolution of their relationship reached a point that neither could ignore. The man, once indifferent and resentful, now found himself noticing her in ways that went beyond admiration. He saw her kindness, strength, and resilience not just as qualities to respect, but as something that touched him deeply. He realized that he had begun to care for her, not because she was forced into his life, but because of who she was and how she made life feel more meaningful. The walls he had built to shield himself from emotion were falling, brick by brick, replaced by a warmth he could not deny. She continued her life as she always had, consistent, humble, and patient. She did not rush him, did not demand his attention, and did not push for affection. Yet, the subtle signs of her perception of his changing feelings were not lost on him. She responded to his growing attention with calmness and understanding. She allowed him to approach her on his own terms, guiding him gently into the new dynamic, without overtly acknowledging it. Her grace made him realize that love was not a matter of forcing feelings, but of creating space for trust, respect, and understanding to grow. He found himself increasingly drawn to her presence. He noticed the way she spoke to the staff, how she carried herself through the house, and how her laughter, soft and sincere, brightened the atmosphere. He felt an unspoken need to protect her, to ensure her comfort, and to support her in ways he had never considered before. His previous pride, stubbornness, and emotional distance were being replaced by a desire to nurture and connect. He was learning to see beyond superficial appearances, to value character and soul over status and wealth. One evening, as they walked through the garden, he spoke more openly than he had ever dared. He talked about his past, his fears, and the pressure he had always felt to maintain control. She listened attentively, offering no judgment, only understanding. Her responses were gentle, guiding, and thoughtful. He realized then that she had a depth of empathy and insight that allowed her to connect with him on a level he had never experienced. It was in this connection that he began to feel the first real stirrings of love, not just for the qualities she possessed, but for the comfort and peace her presence brought to his life. The household had begun to reflect the subtle changes in their relationship. Staff and friends noticed the difference in his demeanor, how he seemed more patient, thoughtful, and even protective of her. The atmosphere in the home became warmer, more harmonious, and less rigid. His respect for her had grown into affection, and his affection was transforming into love. He was beginning to understand that love was not an overwhelming force of passion alone, but a steady, quiet recognition of someone's value, integrity, and impact on one's life. He found himself thinking about her constantly, remembering moments where she had acted with courage, compassion, and insight. He reflected on the fire incident, the small gestures of kindness she performed daily, the way she had quietly influenced everyone around her. These reflections made him realize that he could no longer imagine life without her. His heart, once closed and guarded, had opened in ways that surprised and challenged him. He was learning to love not just her presence, but her very essence. She, for her part, sensed the subtle shift in his feelings. She did not push or manipulate. She simply continued her life with patience and grace. She responded to his attention with warmth and openness, creating a space where love could grow naturally. She understood that true connection could not be forced, and that the best way to nurture it was through consistency, kindness, and authenticity. Her approach allowed him to confront his own emotions without fear or judgment, and to gradually embrace the love he had once denied himself. A turning point came during a quiet afternoon when he faced a personal crisis, a moment of vulnerability he could not hide. She was there, calmly offering guidance and support, listening without judgment, and providing comfort. Her presence was steady, grounding, and reassuring. In that moment, he realized that his love for her was no longer abstract or uncertain. It was real, tangible, and necessary. He had grown to rely on her not just for practical matters, but for emotional stability and companionship. Her love, expressed through patience and understanding, had awakened his own. He began to express his feelings more openly, though gently and cautiously. Small gestures of care, attentiveness, and consideration replaced the indifference he had once shown. He found himself wanting to make her life easier, to ensure her happiness, and to protect her from harm. His actions reflected a deepening emotional bond, one built on respect, admiration, and a growing understanding of what it meant to truly care for another person. She noticed these changes and responded with subtle acknowledgement. neither demanding nor withholding affection. She allowed the relationship to develop at its own pace, guided by mutual understanding and trust. Her patience and consistency created an environment where love could flourish naturally. The man, once resistant and distant, began to embrace the connection fully, recognizing that true love required vulnerability, trust, and emotional openness. The man's transformation did not go unnoticed by those around him. Friends and family saw the difference in his demeanor, how he engaged with her thoughtfully, how he considered her opinions, and how he prioritized her well-being. They recognized that the relationship had evolved from reluctant obligation to genuine partnership. It was a testament to her character, her patience, the quiet strength that had gradually touched his heart. Gradually, he came to understand that love was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the steady presence, the thoughtful consideration, and the willingness to understand and support another person. He saw that she had taught him these lessons not through words alone, but through her actions, consistency, and authenticity. Her blindness, poverty, and initial vulnerability were irrelevant. What mattered was the depth of her character and the impact she had on his life. By the time the seasons changed, he had embraced his feelings fully. He no longer felt the need to guard his heart or deny the affection that had grown naturally over time. He expressed his love openly, not through extravagant displays, but through small, meaningful gestures that reflected his understanding and appreciation of her. He had learned to value patience, empathy, and integrity, and to recognize the quiet power of resilience and kindness. She, too, embraced the bond they had developed. Their connection was not sudden or dramatic, but steady, rooted in respect, trust, and shared experiences. They had both grown through the challenges they had faced, and their love reflected the understanding, patience, and compassion that had guided their journey. It was a love that was grounded in reality, in the daily acts of care, consideration, and mutual support. In the end, the man realized that he had been transformed by the woman he had once resented. She had shown him the true meaning of strength, compassion, and love. He had learned to see beyond appearances, wealth, and superficial judgments, and to value the qualities that truly mattered. Their relationship, born out of circumstance, had blossomed into genuine love, built on understanding, respect, and shared experiences. The story concluded with a sense of fulfillment and hope. The man and woman, once separated by circumstance and prejudice, had found a deep and meaningful connection. They had grown individually and together, learning lessons of patience, empathy, and emotional openness. Their love was quiet, steady, and profound, a testament to the power of character, resilience, and understanding. It was a reminder that true love often grows in unexpected places, and that the most remarkable bonds are forged through shared experiences, mutual respect, and the quiet strength of the human heart.